In a world of glass and steel, Eleanor Vance commanded an empire from a throne, 80 floors above the city. Her office was a sterile expanse of white marble and chrome, where the only color came from the cold, digital glow of stock tickers. Her hands, always perfectly manicured, signed deals that shifted economies. Yet they had never known the satisfying grit of honest labor. Her heart, much like her penthouse apartment, was spacious, empty, and impeccably guarded. Miles away, in a neighborhood the city had forgotten, Elias Thorne's world was one of iron, oil, and the smell of ozone. His kingdom was a small, cluttered auto garage, its walls lined with tools that were extensions of his own hands. Those hands, permanently stained with the ghost of grease, could listen to the secret language of a sputtering engine and diagnose its ailments with a surgeon's precision. His world was small, but it was full. At its center was Maya, his 7-year-old daughter, whose crayon drawings were taped over peeling paint, their vibrant colors a defiant protest against the grime. The collision of these two worlds began, as such things often do, with the sound of failure. Eleanor's custom-built, one-of-a-kind supercar, the Vance Comet, a monument to her own technological prowess, died with a pathetic cough directly in front of the Greasy Spoon diner, where Elias and Maya were sharing a plate of fries. A crowd gathered. Eleanor emerged from the silent machine, her fury a cold, sharp thing. "Get my engineers on the line now," she snapped into her phone. "And find me a local tow. This pathetic town probably doesn't even have one that can handle a vehicle of this class." Her voice cut through the humid afternoon air, dripping with a disdain that made the onlookers flinch. Maya tugged on her father's sleeve. "Daddy, the lady is sad her car is broken." Elias looked from his daughter's concerned face to the arrogant woman radiating frustration. He saw the car, and in it, he saw a ghost from another life. He felt a familiar, unwelcome pull. "It's not just broken," he said softly, almost to himself. "It's been designed to fail." Eleanor overheard him. She turned, her eyes sweeping over his worn work shirt and stained jeans with blatant dismissal. "And what would you know about it?" she sneered. "Let me guess, you're the local expert?" A challenge hung in the air, thick with her contempt. "I'll pay $10,000 to anyone in this backwater who can even tell me what's wrong with it. $50,000 if you can get it started." It was a performance, a public display of power meant to humiliate the very idea of local competence. Elias met her gaze. He thought of Maya's school tuition, of the leak in their apartment roof, of the quiet dignity his own father had taught him. He wiped his hands on a rag tucked into his belt. "I'll take a look," he said, his voice calm and even, a stark contrast to her, brittle anger. Eleanor scoffed but gestured impatiently at the car, a silent, "Be my guest." She expected him to fumble, to posture, to fail. It would be a brief, amusing diversion. But Elias did not fumble. He circled the vehicle once, his eyes not on the sleek aerodynamic body, but on the seams beneath it. He didn't need to pop the hood. He knelt, his ear close to the undercarriage, and tapped a sequence along the chassis. The crowd watched, confused. Eleanor watched, annoyed. Elias closed his eyes for a moment, listening. He heard it. A faint, asynchronous hum in the secondary power converter. A tiny arrhythmia in the heart of the machine. It was a flaw so subtle, so deeply embedded in the proprietary architecture, that only its creator could have recognized it by sound alone. He stood up. "The parallel inverter for the kinetic energy recovery system has a recursive fault in its firmware," he stated, his tone matter of fact. "It's creating a cascading power drain that trips the master circuit. It's not a breakdown, it's a self-destruct sequence." Eleanor's perfectly composed expression faltered. Her own engineers, the best in the world, were still arguing about fuel lines on the phone. This grease monkey was speaking a language only a handful of people on the planet understood. "That's impossible," she stammered. Elias ignored her, borrowing a small toolkit from the diner's owner, who used it for fixing the jukebox. He lay on the hot asphalt, slid under the multi-million-dollar vehicle, and went to work. There was no dramatic struggle. There were only the quiet, efficient sounds of a master at his craft, a precise snip, a soft click, the faint scrape of metal on metal. 10 minutes later, he slid back out. "Try it now," he said, wiping his hands. Trembling with a mixture of disbelief and fury at being so thoroughly upstaged, Eleanor slid into the driver's seat. She pressed the ignition button. The engine roared to life, a perfect, powerful purr that vibrated through the pavement. The crowd gasped. Eleanor stared at the dashboard, then at the mechanic standing there, his face calm, his hands stained. He had not just fixed her car, he had exposed a crack in the very foundation of her world. That night, sleep offered Eleanor no escape. The image of the mechanic's hands, calm, knowing, competent, haunted her. She had built an empire on the belief that she could buy the best talent, that genius was a commodity. Yet this man, in his faded jeans, had diagnosed and solved a problem in minutes that her entire $100 million R&D department had assured her was impossible. The next morning, she gave her head of security a simple, urgent command. Find out who he is. I want to know everything. The initial search was fruitless. Elias Thorne was a ghost. He paid his bills in cash, had no credit cards, no social media, no digital footprint. He was a registered mechanic, owner of Thorne's Auto, Repair. Before that, nothing. It was as if he'd simply appeared 5 years ago. Dig deeper, Eleanor commanded, her obsession growing. Check academic records, engineering guilds, government contracts. Use the name Vance, too, just in case. The last part was a wild hunch, a shot in the dark. A day later, the file landed on her desk. It was thin, but its contents were explosive. Elias Thorne did not exist in the world of engineering, but a decade ago, a man named Dr. Elias Vance was the brightest star at a rival corporation, Phoenix Automotive, a prodigy, the lead architect of a revolutionary hybrid engine, the very engine that powered her custom Comet. He was a genius who had vanished overnight after a catastrophic project failure, a public disaster that had ruined careers. The official report cited his gross negligence. But buried in the notes, Eleanor's investigator had found whispers of sabotage, of a young, principled engineer who took the fall to protect his team after refusing to compromise on safety. He hadn't been negligent, he had been betrayed. He had lost his career, his name, and his wife in the ensuing fallout. He had taken his daughter and simply disappeared, choosing obscurity over a world that had broken him. Eleanor stared out at the city, her city, and felt a profound chill. The mechanic wasn't just a mechanic. He was the ghost of the man who had designed her car, a fallen king living in exile. Armed with this knowledge, Eleanor drove to the garage herself. It was a different car this time, a standard luxury sedan, but it felt alien. She found Elias recalibrating the timing on an old pickup truck, Maya sitting on a stool beside him, carefully cleaning a wrench with a rag. The scene was so simple, so pure, it felt like a rebuke to her entire existence. She held out an envelope. $50,000, she said, her voice lacking its usual authority. As promised. Elias didn't even look at it. I fixed it for 10. That was the deal. Don't be ridiculous. I want to hire you. Name your price, a directorship, your own lab. He finally stopped his work and looked at her. His eyes were tired. I'm not for sale, Ms. Vance. I have a life here. Just then, Maya slid off the stool and walked shyly toward Eleanor. She held out a piece of paper. It was a crayon drawing of a woman with a sharp haircut standing next to a broken car, with big cartoonish tears rolling down her cheeks. Above it, she had written, "The Sad Lady." Eleanor froze. In all her life, no one had ever seen past her power to the profound loneliness beneath. No one but this little girl. A crack appeared in the armor around her heart. As she stood there, speechless, her phone buzzed with an emergency alert from her own company. Then another and another. A newscast playing on a small television in the corner of the garage delivered the blow. Vance Motors was issuing an immediate global recall of its flagship electric vehicle, the Odyssey, due to a critical battery flaw causing spontaneous fires. The flaw, the news anchor reported, was in the power management system. Eleanor's blood ran cold. It was the same system, the same architecture as her Comet. This wasn't an accident. It was an attack. She looked at Elias, the only man on Earth who understood what was happening. Her arrogance dissolved, replaced by a terrifying vulnerability. "Help me," she whispered. "Please. They're trying to destroy my company." An unlikely alliance was forged in the smell of motor oil and fear. Eleanor brought Elias into the pristine, sterile environment of Vance Motors' R&D headquarters. He was a creature from another world, his grease-stained work boots a scandal on the polished concrete floors. The engineers, with their crisp lab coats and Ivy League degrees, looked at him with open condescension, but their smirks vanished when he began to speak. He didn't use their corporate jargon or refer to their complex schematics. He walked up to a disassembled Odyssey battery pack, placed a hand on it, and described the flow of energy as if he were talking about a living thing. He identified the malicious code in minutes. "It's sabotage," he confirmed, his voice echoing in the silent lab. "Elegant, vicious. It's designed to pass all initial diagnostics and only fail under a specific, unpredictable set of charging conditions." The prime suspect was obvious: Marcus Sterling, Eleanor's chief rival, CEO of Phoenix Automotive, and the man she had almost married before his naked ambition had repulsed her. He was the one who had benefited most from Elias's public disgrace a decade ago. But proving it was another matter. Every digital pathway they followed led to a dead end. Every piece of code was firewalled, scrubbed, and anonymized. Marcus was a master of corporate warfare. As days turned into a week, the pressure mounted. The company's stock was in freefall. The board of directors, led by a faction loyal to Marcus, was calling for Eleanor's resignation. They were losing. One evening, defeated, they sat in Eleanor's silent office. "It's over," she said, her voice hollow. "He's going to win." Elias looked out the window at the city lights. He remembered the long nights, the joy of creation, the bitter sting of betrayal. "When they forced me to add the vulnerabilities to the original design," he said slowly, "I built something for myself, a signature, a diagnostic backdoor that only I could access. They made me remove it, but the foundational logic, the echoes of it, they might still be there." A flicker of hope ignited in the darkness. They raced back to the lab, the fate of a global corporation resting on the ghost of a decade-old piece of code. For 48 hours, they worked without sleep. It was a symphony of two worlds colliding. Eleanor, with her limitless resources, marshaled servers and cleared networks. Elias, with his intuitive genius, navigated the labyrinth of code. He wasn't just an engineer, he was an artist, and the software was his canvas. He found fragments of his old work, digital fossils that proved he was on the right path. As he worked, Eleanor saw the man he could have been, the leader, the innovator, the visionary. She saw the passion that had been beaten out of him, slowly returning to his eyes, and in her, he saw a strength that went beyond balance sheets and stock prices. He saw a woman fighting not just for her company, but for her father's legacy. In the darkest hour of the second night, he found it. A single encrypted data packet, hidden within a redundant subroutine. It was his signature, and it was a key. With trembling fingers, he ran a decryption algorithm of his own design. A file opened. It contained a series of communications, digitally signed and time-stamped, from a shell corporation to the lead programmer on the Odyssey project. And at the bottom, a final damning transfer authorization. The Shell Corporation was a subsidiary of Phoenix Automotive. The authorization was signed by Marcus Sterling himself. They had him. Cold, hard, undeniable proof. Just as the file opened, Eleanor's phone rang. It was the chairman of the board. "The emergency meeting is in 2 hours, Eleanor. Be prepared to tender your resignation." The boardroom was a coliseum, and Eleanor was the gladiator being thrown to the lions. The air was thick with tension and the smug satisfaction of her enemies. Marcus Sterling was there, invited as a potential advisor for the transition. He gave Eleanor a look of feigned sympathy that was more insulting than any gloat. She began her presentation, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. She detailed the crisis, acknowledging the failures. The board members shifted impatiently, waiting for the inevitable surrender. "The flaw in the Odyssey," she continued, her voice gaining strength, "was not a failure of our engineering. It was an act of industrial espionage." A murmur went through the room. Marcus chuckled softly. "A desperate and baseless accusation, Eleanor. You have no proof." "You're right," she said, turning to the door. "I don't, but he does." The door opened and Elias Thorne walked in. He wore a simple, clean button-down shirt, but he looked as out of place as a wolf in a sheep pen. The board stared, confused. Who was this nobody? "This is Elias Thorne," Eleanor announced. "He is the man who identified the sabotage." Marcus's face went pale. He recognized the name. He recognized the man he had destroyed a decade ago. Elias didn't look at Marcus. He looked at the screen. "The malicious code in the Odyssey is a variation of a design I created 10 years ago," Elias said, his voice ringing with quiet authority. "It carries a unique digital signature, my signature." He connected a laptop to the main projector. Lines of code filled the screen. "I built a backdoor into that original design, a key that only I can use." He typed a command string. The screen flickered, and the encrypted file he had found appeared. He ran the decryption. The room fell silent as Marcus Sterling's name and digital signature bloomed on the screen next to orders to sabotage the Odyssey project. It was over. The betrayal was laid bare for all to see. Marcus stared at the screen, his empire of deceit crumbling around him in a cascade of glowing pixels. The fallout was immediate and spectacular. Marcus Sterling was ruined, arrested before he even left the building. The press, smelling blood and a hero, descended. But they weren't interested in Eleanor Vance, the Billionaire CEO. They wanted the grease-stained genius, the mechanic who saved an empire. Elias, uncomfortable in the spotlight, gave a single brief statement, crediting his team, Eleanor and Maya, before retreating back to the quiet of his garage. Vance Motors was saved. Its stock soared on the news of the thwarted corporate espionage and the genius who had uncovered it. A few days later, Eleanor once again found herself standing at the entrance to his garage. This time, she wasn't there to challenge or investigate him. She was there to offer her surrender. "I want you to come back," she said, no pretense in her voice. "Not just as a consultant. I'm offering you the position of Chief Innovation Officer. Your own division, unlimited budget, name your price." She was offering him the life that had been stolen from him. Elias wiped his hands on a rag, the familiar motion grounding him. He looked around the garage, at the tools that had been his only companions, at the crayon drawing Maya had made, which he'd taped to his main toolbox. He looked at Eleanor, and for the first time, saw not a CEO, but a woman who had been humbled, who had learned the difference between price and value. "I accept," he said, "but on my terms." He wouldn't be in the glass tower. He would establish a new independent skunk works lab, away from the corporate bureaucracy, focused purely on safety, discovery, and building things that last. He would lead it, but he would also keep his garage. He needed to keep his hands dirty, to stay connected to the real world. Eleanor agreed without hesitation. She understood. He wasn't just taking a job, he was teaching her how to build a better world. The final scene was not in a boardroom or a lab. It was on a small hill overlooking the city, months later. Elias, Eleanor, and Maya were flying a kite. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, reflecting off the distant glass towers. Elias's hand, still calloused but clean, found Eleanor's. Their fingers intertwined. They weren't a CEO and a mechanic anymore. They were two broken people who had found a way to repair each other, building a new family from the wreckage of their pasts. They were home. Have you ever been underestimated, judged by your appearance rather than the content of your character? This story reminds us that true genius is not found in titles or bank accounts, but in the quiet integrity of a job well done. It shows that even the most guarded hearts can be opened by simple kindness, and that second chances are not just about reclaiming what was lost, but about building something new and more beautiful in its place. Share this story if you believe in the power of redemption and the quiet heroes who walk among us.